Hey, we're in a series called Hindsight 2020. And as I was thinking about hindsight and reflecting over that, as we're talking about like hindsight to life, I kept coming back to this statement I've heard before. And it goes like this: If I only knew then what I know now. You've probably heard that before at some time in life. If you haven't, I'll break that down for us. But if I only knew then, if I only knew at this point in time in my life that things would turn out this way, probably wouldn't have made those decisions. If I only knew then what I know now. Example for that, I look back in high school. I dated this guy for a long time, 5 years. That's very serious, especially in high school. But in that relationship, I fully believed I had to be with him to have value. Like, you can easily buy into that in relationships when you're young. You start growing and knowing somebody, and then you get fully attached, which is just a big word called codependency, because I fully believed I had to have him for value and security. And that was high school. That was me in high school. That's what I knew at the time. And I look back, and now I look at that relationship, I'm like, that was really unhealthy. That was a mess. If I only knew then what I know now, if I only knew in that relationship how much damage in my future would come from it, I would not have been in that relationship for that long. Another example, if Tim Gerald knew how much Taco Bell would affect him, if he knew, because there will come a time in life where Tim Gerald will keep eating his Taco Bell, and he's gonna be like, man, why do my joints hurt so bad? Like, why am I falling apart? There will come that time. Yeah, this is the message right here, y'all. This is it. He's gonna say, man, if I only knew then that Taco Bell was wrecking my body, I would not have eaten it. The 80-year-old Tim Gerald, I'm thinking of him now. I care about you too much. But that will happen. And that statement is what I thought about for hindsight for us in this series. If I only knew then what I know now. And the reason that statement is so true is because we don't stop, slow down, and reflect on our life, to look back on our life and say, oh, that's why this happened. But we just go and go and go because our culture runs at such a crazy pace that we have to keep up with everything in the world that we don't stop, slow down, and reflect. So a big reason that statement is so true is because we don't stop and we don't reflect. That's the problem of it all. And here's what this is what hindsight means. Hindsight is the understanding of an event or a situation after it has happened. So it's kind of like this aha moment. So to have true hindsight, you have to stop and look back and reflect on a certain event or situation in your life to understand, oh, that makes sense. Maybe later in life we'll look back at COVID and be like, oh, that's what God was doing. These are the reasons that these things happened in my life. But we miss it completely if we don't stop and slow down, because the opposite of hindsight is what we're already doing, right? Just keep ourselves busy, scroll on our phone, just keep going, and we don't stop. And we completely miss hindsight, this 2020 vision that we can have. And I want to look back to a guy who had incredible hindsight in the Bible. And this man's name is King Solomon. King Solomon, man, God came to King Solomon and asked him, what is one thing that you want? I think quite often that would be really cool if God just sat me down and was like, Katie, what is one thing you want? I don't know how I'd answer that. But he asked him that question, and guess what he said? What is the one thing that King Solomon wanted? Wisdom. The one thing, he's like, yes, I want wisdom. And wisdom is not just knowing God's truth. Wisdom is not just understanding knowledge, because we can have a lot of professors in college who are wise, right? But true godly wisdom is living out God's truth. Wisdom is not just understanding a lot of things and being really smart. I like to think of it as this way. Wisdom, as the Bible talks about, is like theology in work clothes. I say it for that reason. Theo means God. ology means study. It's the study of God, and the work clothes part is living it out. It's actually, okay, I know God's truth. I'm not gonna just think about God's truth. I'm actually gonna live it out. And that's what wisdom is. And that's what King Solomon is saying he wanted from God. He said, I want wisdom. That's the one thing. So we're gonna go to the book that is called Ecclesiastes, that King Solomon wrote. And we're gonna read a couple verses that may just be the most encouraging verses you will ever hear in your life. More encouraging than the verse you may have on a coffee mug or a t-shirt. Are y'all ready for that? Like, I'm talking next level encouraging. It's Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Ecclesiastes chapter 1. I brought my big Bible, y'all. It's heavy up here. It's all right, though. Ecclesiastes chapter 1. You ready for the encouragement? All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? No, it was here already long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations. And even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. I know you're feeling incredibly encouraged, right? Like all of life is meaningless, weary, nothing new under the sun. The eye is seeing, never fully satisfied. The ear is hearing, never fully satisfied. Generation comes, generation goes, nothing is new. So is COVID new? Pandemic? All the things that COVID has brought on? Nothing is new under the sun. And the reason that I read this, as I was thinking about Ecclesiastes as true hindsight, because we wouldn't even have the book of Ecclesiastes if King Solomon wouldn't have stopped and reflected, which is crazy to think about. You can't come up with these truths and these reflections of life in Ecclesiastes without stop and looking at God and reflecting on life. If nothing is new under the sun, all of these verses seem very discouraging. Very, very discouraging, I know. But the encouragement part of it is we can have his hindsight, that we don't have to go in the pace that King Solomon said he went for so long. Because here's something, if you study the life of King Solomon, which I encourage you to do all through Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, there's so many places in the Old Testament of King Solomon. He had everything. Like anybody who's been famous or popular to you, who's made a lot of money that you know and you see on TV, like nothing compared to King Solomon. He won it, he got it. Like there's nothing that King Solomon didn't have that he did. Like if he wanted something, it was just a matter of time and he would have it. And he's here saying, hey, all of life, meaningless. And you can read through Ecclesiastes, it's like chasing after the wind. This is his hindsight. He's like, hey guys, I've done it all. I've seen it all. I've experienced it all. And guess what? At the end of it, meaningless. So what does that say to us? And then you find yourself in the New Testament, in the red letters, Jesus says this in Matthew. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? That's a heavy verse. Like you can go get whatever this world has to offer, but lose your soul in the end. What gain is there? Ecclesiastes is saying this. It's a beautiful picture of the connection of what Jesus is saying there. Hey, go chase it. Go do all those things. My hindsight says dead end in the end. Chasing after the wind, meaningless. Nothing new under the sun. Super discouraging to hear generation comes and generation goes. It is. It's like, well, golly, what hope is there? And there isn't hope apart from Jesus. But there's so much hope because we're not created for just this world. The greatest hindsight is knowing, okay, the scriptures are telling me there's a greater vision, a greater view in life than what's just in the here and now. I asked myself this question a lot before I came to Christ and still struggle with it a lot. I sit and I'm just honest and I'm like, there's gotta be more. I'm sure Ecclesiastes, King Solomon reflected on that quite a bit because he had it all. But have you ever stopped and thought about that for yourself too? Like you're going through life. Life's pretty good. You get a couple things you want. Christmas comes around. You get all this technology. It's fun for a time. And then you just kind of sit and you're like, man, there got to be more. Like there's just got to be more to what's going on in my life right now. Like, is there more? And the book of Ecclesiastes just speaks to that, this hindsight. Because that's a real question we all as humans at some point in our life will stop and reflect on. There's just got to be more to this. There's got to be more than what's just going on in my life right now. And King Solomon, I'm sure, reflected much on that statement of, if I only knew then what I know now. Like that's what the whole book is like, hey, these are all the things I wish I knew, and he gives it to us. Of saying, hey, it is meaningless. What is more valuable than your soul, as Matthew talks about? And like I've said, Ecclesiastes is our hindsight. It is our 2020 view to be able to see the teachings of what this guy who had everything and where that led him. And it's just crazy to stop and think we wouldn't even have the Bible without hindsight, without God using some really messed up people, but they had to stop and be with God and reflect. If you just go and push through life, you miss so much sweet connection you can have with God, of reflecting over what your past years have been, and they can teach us something sweet. But we have to trust God and sit with him and reflect. So to ask yourself that question with that statement, like you'd probably have different answers to it. But if I knew then what I know now, like how would you answer that? Just your couple years of existing. It doesn't matter if you're in 6th grade or you're a senior. You can stop and reflect. If I only knew then what I know now. Like to stop and think, how many different ways would you answer that? And maybe for you, it's like past pain and things you went through where you're like, I did not ask for this in my life. I don't know why God thought I could handle this. Because it is hard to reflect. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it, and we'd all just be a lot of wise people, right? Like, not many people are posting in culture like, hey, reflect, stop, slow down. Like, those words are not attractive to us. At least not to me. Being a 7 on the Enneagram, I'm like, what's the next cool thing in life? I'm trying to just go have fun. Rest, stop, slow down, to reflect, to have 2020 view. That's hard to do. It is. And mostly because we are afraid of what we might find in our life. We can be afraid of, if I do sit in silence, what will happen if I start thinking about this certain situation in my life that I swore I would leave alone? But that might be the very thing that God uses in your life to depend on him. But we miss it. Like I've been saying this whole time, we can just miss it completely if we don't stop and reflect. And it is scary. It is scary to sit in silence and allow God to do some real sweet work on our soul. Because what is more important than our soul, as Matthew talked about? Nothing. And the beauty is, all through the Bible, when you read, God allowed his people to go through things in life to depend on him. God is such a good, gracious Father to wake us up and allow us to see our need for him. Because the worst tragedy in life is not death. The worst tragedy in life is going your whole life, like King Solomon, coming to the end, and you had it all, but you did not honor and serve and submit your life to God, which his kingdom lasts forever. That's the greatest tragedy, is not knowing God. Because the beauty of hindsight in this series is the Bible is our full hindsight. Like, God literally has all of life's answers for us in this book. As the Bible tells one story from cover to cover, as Jesus as the main focus and character. He is the main laser focus through cover to cover of the entire Bible, and Jesus is our hindsight. Because John 1:1 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." That's a lot of words there. In the beginning was the Word. And Jesus was in the beginning with it all. So as Tim said, God is in control, God is good, and God is close, and God is all-knowing. God knows all things. One of my favorite pictures that I can just kind of imagine for Jesus being all-knowing is if he was at the top of the Grand Canyon. If you've ever been to the Grand Canyon before, it's beautiful. It's as if he is at the top of the Grand Canyon looking out, and that's his view. He can see the full picture of everything. And we are at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and we can only see, our view is only what's in front of us. We don't have that 20/20 view to see things in God's perspective. So we need to be fully dependent on the one who has the full view over all things. And the more we stay connected to him, we can know his ways. We can know, okay, God's trying to protect me because he can see this coming in my life. And I can't see it, but he's God. He is all knowing, and we have access to God. But like I said, if we just keep going and going without stopping, slowing down and reflecting, we miss that sweet connection we can have with God, because he sees the things ahead, and he can teach us about our life in the past in ways we just can't on our own, because we don't have that view. He has that Grand Canyon view that can see all things. And instead of living with that statement, what can keep us from living in the "if I only knew then what I know now," is we can prepare by saying, man, if I know God's truth now, I can prepare for what's ahead. Like, if I know God's truth now, if I'm a good student of God and his word, and I understand the scriptures, and I'm spending time with God, I can prepare for what's ahead. Not that we'll have all the answers and get that perfectly right, but man, if I know God's truth now in 6th grade, think about what that can do. You start writing in your Bible and spending time in the scriptures, and you look back as the years come, and you're continually growing with God. That sweetness of knowing his truth. The earlier you start, the better. Because you can really create and develop that close relationship with God. If I know God's truth now, I can prepare for what's ahead. Because once again, God has that clear vision and view that we just don't have. And here's what's true. I looked at my journal when COVID was going through, is I just kept thinking about COVID and how new that feels. Like no one's ever experienced this before. And Ecclesiastes says nothing new under the sun. And I started thinking, man, there's going to be pain in this life. Like no one makes it out without pain. That's just the truth of it. And there will come a time where another pandemic will happen in probably y'all's lifetime. I hate to scare you and discourage you in that way, but it's just true. Like you're going to face crisis and difficult things ahead, maybe harder than COVID. So that much more, I say, hey, if you know God's truth now, you can prepare for what's ahead, so we don't miss what God's trying to teach us in this season with COVID and just this quarantine life. We're all just ready to be done with it. But here's the truth. We're not just trying to push through and get past pain, because we're going to have some more pain ahead. And if we don't stop, slow down, and see what God wants to teach us right here with the hindsight that he gives us. And I want to close with another place in Ecclesiastes, actually the very end. Ecclesiastes 12, verse 1. It says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. before the days of trouble come. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come. Before trouble comes, so once again, if I know God's truth now, I can prepare for what's ahead. He's saying this to y'all, the youth. You're never too young or don't know enough of the Bible, but the beauty is you can sit with God with no agenda, just simply being with him and enjoying God, sitting at his feet and just saying, God, these are things that have happened in my life. I don't understand it, but you make sense of things that are confusing. That's what kind of God he is. Remember your Creator in your youth so you can prepare for the days of trouble ahead. Y'all, that's hindsight. If I know God's truth now, I can prepare for what's ahead.